"Do whatever you want, cowboy," said the Apache woman tied to the fence. But then everything changed. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden haze over the dry plains of the southwest. The wind whispered through the tall, brittle grass, carrying dust and faint smells of sagebrush. A lone figure appeared on the horizon, slowly coming into view as he rode his weary horse across the uneven land. The man was a cowboy, roughened by years of wandering, his face tanned and lined from the scorching sun. His clothes were worn, patched in places, and his boots carried the dust of countless miles. There was a quiet weight about him, as if the miles he had traveled were not only on the land, but also etched deep into his spirit. The small town he rode toward was almost empty. Its wooden buildings leaned slightly, their paint peeling in the harsh sun. A few children played near a well, laughing and chasing one another in the dusty streets. The adults watched from the shadows of porches, cautious eyes following the stranger. Rumors traveled fast in places like this, and it was clear the townsfolk had already heard of the cowboy who roamed the plains alone. He had a reputation for doing what he thought was right, even when it went against the law or the expectations of others. That reputation made some admire him, and others fear him. As he rode closer, the cowboy noticed movement near the edge of town. His horse slowed, sensing the tension in the air. Ahead, a shocking sight stopped him in his tracks. Tied to a wooden fence was a woman. She was an Apache woman, strong and proud, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders. Despite being tied and alone, her posture was upright, her chin lifted, and her eyes locked on the cowboy as if daring him to approach. There was something in her gaze that made him pause, something that spoke of courage, defiance, and a life that had been forced to endure hardship. The woman's lips curled slightly and she spoke, her voice steady and fearless. "Do whatever you want, cowboy," she said. There was no fear in her tone, only a challenge, almost teasing, as if she were testing the man before her. The cowboy frowned, unsure how to respond. Bobby Yasavia. He had seen fear in many eyes in his travels, but this was different. Her courage was like a shield, unbroken even in the face of danger. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and for a moment the world seemed to pause around them. The cowboy dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dry dirt. He studied her carefully. The rope around her wrists looked worn and rough, but it had held firm. There were small marks on her arms and face, signs of struggle, yet her spirit had not been broken. He could sense the story behind her eyes, a story of survival, loss, and determination. He had encountered many people in need before, but this woman was different. There was a fire in her that demanded attention, that made it impossible to look away. As he approached, the woman tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "You don't have to do anything," she said, her voice calm but with an edge. "If you leave, that's your choice. If you stay, well, we'll see what happens." There was a quiet warning in her words, a hint that this encounter would not be simple. The cowboy could feel the tension building, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had always been a man who made his own choices, but now those choices felt heavier, more consequential. The townsfolk watched from a distance, their whispers like the wind through the grass. Some frowned, concerned about the consequences of the cowboy's presence. Others seemed curious, perhaps hoping he would act in a way that would protect the woman. The air was thick with uncertainty, a mix of fear, hope, and expectation. The cowboy took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had traveled long distances, faced harsh weather, and survived dangers that would have broken most men. Yet he had never encountered a situation quite like this. He knelt slightly to examine the rope binding her wrists. The woman noticed and raised an eyebrow, a small, wry smile appearing on her face. "Careful," she said. "I might bite." The cowboy chuckled quietly, shaking his head. Humor in the face of danger was a sign of strength, not weakness. It reminded him that she was more than just a victim. She was a person with her own will, her own mind, and her own courage. He could not ignore that. He could not simply turn away. As he worked to free her, he listened to her story, piecing together fragments of what had happened. She spoke of raiders who had taken her from her home, of the harsh journey she had endured, and of the resilience it took to survive each day. Her words were measured, honest, and full of emotion. They painted a picture of someone who had faced unimaginable challenges yet refused to surrender to them. The cowboy felt a strange mixture of respect and empathy. He knew he could help her, but he also understood that his help alone would not define her fate. Once the ropes were loosened, she stood tall, rubbing her wrists but never lowering her gaze. "Thank you," she said simply. There was no pleading in her voice, no demand for gratitude. It was a statement of fact, as if acknowledging help did not diminish her independence. The cowboy nodded, understanding that respect was a two-way street. He had acted, yes, but he had also been changed by witnessing her strength. The plains, the wind, and the sun seemed to shift around them, marking the start of a moment that neither would forget. The first steps of trust were fragile. The woman remained cautious, watching the cowboy with a careful eye. He sensed the tension, the underlying fear of betrayal that came from a lifetime of hardship. Yet she was willing to take the risk, willing to allow a stranger to stand beside her, if only for a short while. That choice, he realized, spoke louder than any words. It was a sign that she was not simply waiting for rescue. She was choosing to face the unknown alongside him, as an equal partner in a difficult moment. As they walked toward the small town together, the cowboy thought about the path that had led him here. Every mile he had traveled, every choice he had made, had prepared him for moments like this. And yet, he also knew that this encounter would challenge him in ways he had never anticipated. The woman's defiance, her courage, and her unwavering spirit would force him to see the world differently, to reconsider what it meant to protect, to help, and to truly act with honor. The sun continued to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the wind carried the scent of dust, sage, and distant rain. In that quiet golden light, the cowboy and the Apache woman moved together. Two people from different worlds brought together by fate, circumstance, and a shared moment of courage. It was the beginning of a story that would test them both, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately change the way they saw themselves and each other. For the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt a spark of something he had not experienced in years: connection, purpose, and the stirring of a new understanding. He knew the path ahead would not be easy, but he also understood that some journeys were worth taking, no matter the risk. And for the Apache woman, tied to a fence yet unbroken in spirit, this encounter marked the start of a turning point. The plains around them were harsh and unforgiving, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The sun had disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving the town in the cool, pale light of early evening. Shadows stretched across the dusty streets, and the wind carried a soft whisper of the plains, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The cowboy walked beside the Apache woman, both of them silent at first. The tension in the air was thick, each step measured and cautious. He could sense her wariness, the careful way she observed every movement, as though expecting danger at any moment. And perhaps she had reason to. The world she had known was full of threats and betrayals, and trust had always been a fragile thing. The townspeople began to peek from behind windows and doors, watching the cowboy and the woman walk through the streets. Some frowned in suspicion, unsure of what to make of the pair. Others whispered to one another, noting the strange combination of courage and defiance the woman displayed. She did not shrink or plead, and the cowboy did not act as a savior or conqueror. Instead, they moved together as equals, a silent acknowledgement that something in their partnership was beginning to form, however tentative it might be. The cowboy led the way to the edge of the settlement, stopping near an old water trough. He set down his pack and leaned on the fence, thinking carefully about his next move. The woman watched him silently, her eyes studying his expression as if trying to read his thoughts. "Why did you stop?" she finally asked, her voice calm but pointed. "You could have left me there. You could have gone on your way." There was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity and the sharp edge of truth. He looked at her, his eyes tired but steady. "I don't leave people behind," he said simply. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter the trouble it might bring. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the world seemed quieter than usual. The woman considered him carefully, perhaps realizing that he was not like most others who had crossed her path. He had his own code, his own rules, and he was willing to act by them even when it might be dangerous or unpopular. Danger, however, was never far in these parts. The cowboy knew that rumors of bandits and raiders were more than just stories. They were real threats, moving through the plains like shadows in the night. He had already sensed something unusual on his journey to the town, a feeling of unease he could not shake. The woman, he realized, might hold more knowledge than she had shared so far, and if they did not act carefully, both she and the town could be in serious danger. The choice he faced was no longer simple. It was a moral dilemma, one that weighed heavily on his shoulders. For hours they talked cautiously, sharing small pieces of their lives. The woman spoke of her family, the hardships they had faced, and the courage it took just to survive each day. She described the harsh terrain, the raids by hostile groups, and the difficult choices she had been forced to make. The cowboy listened quietly, absorbing every word. He had traveled far and seen much, but her story was different. It carried a weight of resilience, of someone who had refused to give up despite the odds. He could not ignore her experiences or the insight she offered.
As the night grew darker, the cowboy realized that staying idle was not an option.
There were threats nearby, and he could feel them in the restless wind and the distant noises that echoed through the empty streets. He had to make a decision, not just for himself, but for the woman and the town as well. The moral lines were not clear. He could act and risk trouble with the townsfolk, or he could do nothing and risk lives. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like never before. The woman noticed his hesitation. "You're thinking about what's right," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Or maybe what's easiest for you. But sometimes doing what's right isn't easy at all." Her words struck him deeply. She was right. He had spent years wandering the plains, avoiding conflict when it suited him, and intervening when he believed it was necessary. But this situation was different. It required careful thought, courage, and the willingness to act even when the outcome was uncertain. The cowboy finally nodded, his jaw tightening with determination. "I'm not going to leave you here," he said. "We'll figure this out together. But I need to know everything you can tell me about what's happening, about any dangers you've seen." The woman met his gaze and slowly nodded in agreement. For the first time there was a subtle shift in her stance, a hint of trust beginning to form. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to move them forward together. She began to speak in more detail, recounting the movements of the raiders who had caused so much suffering in the region. She described their methods, the way they struck quickly and disappeared into the wilderness, and the patterns she had noticed in their attacks. The cowboy listened intently, piecing together the information with his own knowledge of the land and the people who moved through it. Together they began to form a plan, not just for survival, but for protection, for standing against the threats that had loomed over the town for far too long. Hours passed in quiet discussion, strategy, and careful observation. The town remained mostly asleep, unaware of the preparations taking place at its edges. The cowboy and the woman worked in silence at times, letting the night provide cover while they moved cautiously. They tested each other's instincts, learning to trust the insights and experience each brought to the table. The bond between them, though new, grew stronger with every shared decision, every careful step taken to avoid danger. The cowboy felt a change within himself. He had spent so long wandering alone, living by his own rules, but now he began to see the value of partnership, not just as an ally in danger, but as a human connection that offered understanding, perspective, and strength. The Apache woman, for her part, also began to see the cowboy differently. He was no longer just a stranger or a wandering figure. He was someone who could act with honor, who could be trusted, and who shared a willingness to face danger together. By the first light of dawn, they had formed a plan that could potentially protect the town from the threat they had identified. It involved careful observation, subtle communication with key townsfolk, and readiness for any attack that might come. Though they both knew there were no guarantees, they also knew that action was necessary. The night had been long and filled with uncertainty, but it had also forged a bond, a silent understanding that they were stronger together than apart. As the sun rose over the plains, casting light on the dusty streets and weathered buildings, the cowboy and the Apache woman prepared to face the day. The challenges ahead were daunting, the risks real, but neither was willing to back down. They had taken the first steps toward trust, toward courage, and toward a shared purpose that could change not only their lives, but the lives of everyone in the town. For the cowboy, it was a lesson in morality, in choice, and in understanding. For the woman, it was a moment of empowerment, a chance to influence the future in a way she had never experienced before. The plains around them were quiet, but there was an underlying tension, a sense that the coming hours would test every decision they had made. Yet, in that quiet tension, there was also hope, a hope born of resilience, courage, and the knowledge that even in the most difficult circumstances, people could act with honor and determination. The cowboy and the Apache woman, brought together by fate and circumstance, were ready to face whatever came next, prepared to act with both courage and wisdom, and to navigate the uncertain path ahead as a team. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and sagebrush. The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, yet a feeling of unease hung over the town. The cowboy and the Apache woman moved carefully through the quiet streets, their eyes sharp, ears alert for any sign of danger. The town seemed almost asleep, unaware of the tension that now pulsed like a hidden heartbeat around them. Every shadow, every distant noise could hold a threat, and both knew that hesitation could cost them dearly. The cowboy had learned from years of traveling the plains that danger often came when least expected. But today he felt something more pressing, a sense that the moment had arrived where choices would no longer be theoretical. The woman walking beside him radiated quiet determination. She had shared all she knew about the raiders, their patterns, their numbers, their strategy. Her voice had been calm yet urgent, filled with the weight of someone who had faced peril many times and survived through wit, courage, and careful planning. "Are you sure this is the way?" the cowboy asked, motioning toward a narrow alley behind one of the wooden buildings. His voice was low, carrying a hint of caution. The woman glanced at him, her eyes steady. "Yes," she said. "If they come this way, we can see them first. We'll have the advantage, but we have to move carefully. One wrong step, and they could be on us before we even know it." Her words were measured, precise, showing a mind sharpened by survival. The cowboy nodded, respecting her judgment. In the days he had spent with her, he had begun to see not only her courage, but her intelligence, her ability to read danger and adapt quickly. They reached the alley and crouched behind a pile of crates, scanning the open street in front of them. The town's main road stretched out, empty and silent. Yet the cowboy's instincts told him the quiet was only temporary, a deceptive calm before a storm. The woman pulled a small piece of charcoal from her pocket and sketched a rough map on a scrap of paper she had kept with her. She pointed to positions where the raiders might approach and where the townsfolk could take cover. "This way," she said, tracing a line toward a corner building. "If they come from the north, we can block them before they reach the center. But if they come from the west, we need to warn the others immediately." The cowboy studied the map, nodding. "We'll need signals," he said. "A bell, a flag, anything to alert the town without alerting them." He scanned the rooftops, the back doors, and the fences, already forming a plan in his mind. Years of wandering the plains had given him experience in strategy and survival, but he recognized that without her knowledge, his skills alone would not be enough. Hours passed as they prepared. They moved quietly, signaling to trusted townspeople, setting traps and obstacles to slow any advance, and establishing lookout points. Each action was deliberate, precise, and carried a sense of urgency. Despite the tension, there was a growing sense of teamwork, a silent acknowledgement that neither could succeed alone. The cowboy had learned to rely on his instincts, but now he learned to trust her instincts as well. As the sun climbed higher, they heard the faint sound of hooves in the distance. The cowboy froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the handle of his revolver. The woman's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the faint clatter of equipment and the voices of men. The raiders were approaching, faster than either had anticipated. "Lay low," she whispered. "We can't let them see us yet." They ducked behind the crates, holding their breaths as the raiders entered the town from the north. The men were rough, armed with weapons, their faces hardened by a life of crime and lawlessness. They moved with confidence, unaware that their target, the town and its unsuspecting people, was now ready to respond. The cowboy's heart raced, but he stayed calm. This was the moment he had prepared for, the test of skill, courage, and strategy that would determine the outcome. The woman gestured to him, pointing toward a narrow street that led to a small bell tower. "If we ring that bell, the town will know," she said. "But we have to time it perfectly. Too soon, and we lose the advantage. Too late, and it could be too late for everyone." The cowboy nodded, understanding the delicate balance of risk and timing. He crept toward the tower, moving silently across the street, the woman covering him with a careful watch. Each step was calculated, each breath controlled. He reached the bell, feeling the rough wood beneath his hands, and prepared to ring it at the precise moment they had agreed upon. Suddenly, one of the raiders turned, scanning the street, and the cowboy froze. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. The woman's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a quiet signal to wait, to remain hidden. The raider moved on, and they both exhaled softly, relief mingled with tension. The town's safety depended on their ability to stay composed, to act with precision, and to trust each other completely. Finally, the moment came. The raiders moved closer to the town's center, and the cowboy rang the bell. Its sound echoed across the streets, sharp and clear, carrying a warning that could not be ignored. The townsfolk stirred, emerging from hidden corners and back alleys, ready to defend their homes. The raiders, caught off guard, faltered for a moment, giving the cowboy, the woman, and the townspeople the advantage they needed. Chaos erupted as the town came alive with movement. Barricades were erected, doors slammed shut, and townspeople shouted warnings and directions. The cowboy and the Apache woman moved through the streets with purpose, guiding and coordinating those around them. Each action required courage and quick thinking. The woman's knowledge of the raiders' habits proved invaluable, allowing them to anticipate the movements and avoid ambushes. Despite the danger, the cowboy felt a surge of admiration and respect for her. She was not merely a survivor, she was a leader in her own right, someone whose insight and courage had changed the tide of what could have been disaster. And he, in turn, offered his experience and strength, protecting those who could not defend themselves, and ensuring that the plan held together under pressure. Together they became a force the raiders had not anticipated, a combination of intelligence, skill, and bravery that turned fear into action. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the raiders had been forced to retreat, confused and disoriented by the resistance they encountered. The town had survived largely unscathed thanks to the careful planning and courageous actions of the cowboy, the Apache woman, and the townsfolk who had risen to defend their homes. There was a moment of quiet after the chaos, a collective exhale as people assessed the aftermath. The cowboy looked at the woman, seeing not only the relief on her face but also the subtle glow of satisfaction that comes from facing danger and overcoming it. She met his gaze, a small smile playing on her lips, and for the first time they allowed themselves a moment of shared triumph. They had acted together, combining courage, wisdom, and strategy, and they had succeeded where many would have failed. As the dust settled, the cowboy realized that this day had changed him. He had faced danger, yes, but more importantly, he had learned the value of trust, partnership, and the strength that comes from working with someone who sees the world differently. The Apache woman had shown him courage that was not loud or boastful, but quiet, steady, and unwavering. And he had shown her that even a wanderer with a solitary life could act with integrity and bravery. The town, now safe for the moment, began to return to a cautious calm. Children emerged from hiding, adults repaired barricades and helped the wounded, and life slowly resumed. Yet the events of the morning had left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed them. The cowboy and the Apache woman, once strangers brought together by circumstance, had proven that courage, intelligence, and trust could overcome fear and danger, no matter how great. As they stood together surveying the town and the horizon beyond, both knew that their journey was far from over. The dangers of the plains remained, and new challenges would inevitably arise. But the turning point had been reached. They had acted together, faced their fears, and emerged stronger. And in that strength they found a bond that could not be broken. A partnership forged in courage, trust, and shared purpose, ready to face whatever came next. The town had survived the immediate danger, but peace was fragile, and both the cowboy and the Apache woman knew it. The early morning sunlight streamed across the dusty streets, but the air remained tense, charged with the knowledge that the raiders could return at any time. The events of the previous day had brought a sense of accomplishment, yes, but also a realization that survival on the plains was never guaranteed. Each moment of calm was temporary, and each decision they made carried weight far beyond themselves. The cowboy walked beside the woman, moving slowly as they surveyed the town. The townsfolk were busy repairing what had been damaged, reinforcing doors, and checking that everyone was accounted for. There was gratitude in their eyes, but there was also hesitation. Trust did not come easily, especially after years of living with fear and violence. The cowboy and the woman had earned respect through action, but now they faced a new challenge, guiding the town toward unity and preparation for the dangers yet to come. "Things will not stay quiet for long," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. "They will return, and next time, they might be stronger or smarter. We have to be ready." The cowboy nodded. Her words reflected the wisdom she had gained from years of survival. She had learned to see patterns, anticipate danger, and act with patience and intelligence. And he, in turn, had begun to understand the value of her perspective. He had spent so long relying on instinct and solitude, but she had shown him that wisdom often came from observation, reflection, and collaboration. They moved through the streets together, talking quietly about what had happened and what could happen next. The cowboy shared stories from his travels, lessons learned from skirmishes, harsh weather, and moments when he had had to rely on his own resourcefulness. The woman listened intently, asking questions and offering her own insights. She spoke of the land, of how to use its features to one's advantage, of how to find water in dry stretches, and of the ways to anticipate movements in both people and animals. Together they began to develop a deeper understanding of each other, not just as allies but as individuals shaped by different experiences, yet bound by similar strengths. Even as they worked, challenges arose. Some townspeople were slow to trust, still wary of the cowboy's reputation as a loner. Others doubted the woman's abilities, seeing her youth and size as weaknesses, rather than recognizing her courage and intelligence. The cowboy had to mediate carefully, demonstrating both patience and authority without being overbearing. He encouraged the townspeople to listen, to observe, and to act with reason rather than fear. Slowly, they began to see that the cowboy and the woman were not just strangers. They were guides, teachers, and partners in the survival of the community.
The woman also faced personal struggles.
Though she had helped defend the town, she carried the weight of her past, the losses, the fear, and the memories of family and home taken from her. She had survived by relying on her own strength, but now she was learning to rely on someone else, and that required vulnerability. Each step of trust was difficult, yet necessary. The cowboy's steady presence, his willingness to act with honor and patience, gave her the courage to open up, to share more of herself, and to see that cooperation could be a source of strength rather than weakness. As days passed, they continued preparing the town. They trained the townsfolk in observation, alertness, and quick defensive maneuvers. They reinforced barricades, organized watches, and created signals for warning of danger. Each effort brought new lessons. The cowboy taught practical skills, honed from years of traveling and surviving alone, while the woman taught strategy and awareness, drawing from her experience with the land and the ways people moved through it. Together, they were a bridge between knowledge and action, combining their strengths to build resilience within the town. At night, when the work was done and the town quieted, they would sit together near the fence where they had first met. The stars stretched endlessly above, and the cool night air carried a sense of calm that felt almost unreal after the tension of the day. They spoke softly, reflecting on their experiences and the changes they had seen in each other. The cowboy admitted that he had not realized how much he had depended on solitude, nor how much he had limited himself by avoiding connections. The woman shared her hopes for the future, dreams of safety and dignity that had once seemed impossible. One evening, as the wind swept across the plains, the woman spoke of fear, not just the fear of raiders, but the fear of being powerless.
"I have spent so much of my life running or hiding," she said.
I forgot that I can stand and fight, that I can make choices that change what happens next. The cowboy nodded, understanding completely. And I've spent so long thinking I could do everything alone. I see now that strength comes from knowing when to act alone and when to act together. It was a moment of mutual understanding, a recognition of growth born from struggle and trust. The days continued, and the bond between them strengthened. They faced small challenges, unexpected visitors, disagreements among townsfolk, and the constant worry that the raiders might return. Each obstacle was a lesson, teaching patience, resilience, and the importance of communication. The woman learned to share responsibility, to guide and trust others in a way she had not before. The cowboy learned humility, empathy, and the power of listening to someone who saw the world differently. Their growth was subtle but profound, shaping them into better leaders and better people. One morning after a night of heavy rain, the cowboy and the woman walked through the streets, checking that everything was secure. The rain had washed the dust from the streets, leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air. Puddles reflected the sunlight, and the town seemed almost renewed. The cowboy noticed how the woman moved with confidence, her steps purposeful, her eyes alert. He realized that she had grown stronger, not only because of survival, but because of the trust they had built, the lessons they had learned, and the partnership they had formed. She was no longer the woman tied to the fence. She was a leader in her own right, capable of shaping the future of the town and protecting herself and others. The town itself had changed as well. The people had learned to work together, to listen to each other, and to act with courage even when fear lingered in the air. The cowboy and the woman had not only defended the town, but had also transformed it, creating a sense of unity that had been missing. The community now relied on observation, planning, and cooperation, understanding that strength came not from individual bravery alone, but from working together toward a common goal. Despite these successes, challenges remained. The raiders had not been defeated, only delayed. The threat of danger would always be present in the harsh world of the plains. But the cowboy and the woman had learned that preparation, wisdom, and trust could turn fear into strength. They had faced not only external threats, but internal ones as well, the doubts, fears, and limitations each had carried. By confronting these challenges, they had grown stronger, more capable, and more aware of the importance of connection and shared purpose. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the cowboy and the Apache woman stood together on a small hill overlooking the town. The wind carried the sense of the plains and the sound of the town settling into evening. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than before. The experiences of the past days had taught them lessons they would carry forever. Courage is not the absence of fear. Strength is not the refusal of help. And true growth comes from facing challenges together. The cowboy looked at the woman, a deep respect in his eyes. She had changed him, just as he had helped her see the power of trust and cooperation. She smiled, a mixture of pride, relief, and hope in her expression. They had faced struggle and hardship, but they had also learned that life could be shaped by choices, courage, and partnership. Together they had survived and grown, ready to face whatever the future might hold, knowing that the lessons of trust, resilience, and shared strength would guide them through even the harshest of challenges. The days that followed the skirmish with the raiders brought a quiet sense of relief to the town. The immediate danger had passed, and the streets, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now carried the soft sounds of life returning. Children laughed as they played in the open spaces, and the townsfolk worked together to repair what had been damaged. Yet, despite this calm, the cowboy and the Apache woman knew that the plains remained unpredictable. Danger might return, but they had learned something invaluable. Together, they were stronger, wiser, and capable of facing whatever came next. The cowboy rode slowly through the streets, checking on the townspeople, offering guidance where needed, and observing the subtle changes that had taken place. There was a newfound sense of unity among the people, a willingness to help one another, to listen, and to act with both caution and courage. The cowboy realized that his presence, combined with the wisdom and strategy of the Apache woman, had inspired the community to see the strength within themselves. They were no longer passive observers of danger, but active participants in their own safety and survival. The Apache woman moved beside him, her expression calm but alert. She had become a figure of quiet leadership in the town, respected not only for her bravery but for her intelligence and strategic thinking. She taught the townsfolk how to observe patterns, anticipate threats, and take proactive measures to protect themselves. Her presence had shifted the balance, transforming fear into preparedness, and she had changed as well. Her confidence, once fueled only by necessity, now shone from a deeper place. She had learned to trust, to cooperate, and to recognize that strength often came from connection rather than solitude. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, the cowboy and the woman stood at the edge of town, looking toward the horizon. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and lavender, and the wind carried the scent of fresh grass and distant wildflowers. The town below was alive with activity, people tending to their homes, repairing fences, and helping one another. The cowboy felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had survived not just by skill or luck, but through courage, strategy, and the willingness to face challenges together. "They will return," the woman said quietly, breaking the silence. Her eyes were focused on the distant hills where danger could be hiding. "But we are ready now. We have learned, prepared, and grown stronger. Nothing can take that away from us." The cowboy nodded, understanding completely. They had faced fear and uncertainty, and though the threat of raiders might linger, they had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that courage and cooperation could overcome even the most difficult challenges. In the weeks that followed, the town became more organized and resilient. The cowboy and the woman worked tirelessly, teaching, guiding, and mentoring the townsfolk. They shared practical skills, from tracking and observation to strategy and quick decision-making. Each lesson carried not only knowledge but also confidence, and soon the town became a model of preparedness and unity. People began to trust each other more deeply, to see value in cooperation, and to understand that courage was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and moral. The relationship between the cowboy and the Apache woman deepened as well. They had started as strangers, brought together by circumstance, but they had grown into companions united by respect, trust, and shared purpose. The cowboy had learned patience, empathy, and the strength that comes from listening and trusting others. The woman had learned to rely on someone outside her tribe, to cooperate without sacrificing her independence, and to see the value in shared knowledge and mutual respect. Together, they had become more than the sum of their experiences. They were a force capable of shaping the world around them. One afternoon, the cowboy led the woman to the fence where they had first met. The memory of that moment, the defiance in her eyes, the challenge in her words, was vivid, almost like it had happened yesterday. He looked at her, a small smile forming. "You were right," he said softly. "That moment changed everything. You changed everything." She returned his gaze, her own smile quiet but full of understanding. "We changed everything," she replied. "Together." The town had begun to recognize her not as a stranger or a captive, but as a leader. People approached her for advice, guidance, and even protection. She accepted the responsibility with grace, knowing that her strength came not from power over others, but from the ability to inspire, teach, and guide. The cowboy observed this transformation with a quiet pride. He had not only helped her survive, he had witnessed her rise, and in the process, he had witnessed the growth of something greater than either of them alone. There were moments of reflection, too. The cowboy thought about the life he had led before this town, a life of solitude and wandering. He had believed independence meant acting alone, relying only on himself. But he had learned that independence and connection were not opposites. They could coexist. Trusting someone, working together, and facing challenges side by side did not diminish his freedom. It enriched it, and the woman had learned a similar lesson. Strength could be found not only in self-reliance, but in shared purpose. As time passed, the town became a symbol of resilience on the plains. Travelers who passed through would speak of the cowboy and the Apache woman, of the partnership that had saved the town from destruction, and of the lessons they had shared. The stories carried a quiet wisdom that courage, intelligence, and trust could transform fear into strength, that partnerships forged in adversity could create lasting change. And for the cowboy and the woman, these stories were not just tales. They were a reflection of the bond they had built, the growth they had experienced, and the lives they had touched. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep orange and purple, the cowboy and the woman stood together on a small hill overlooking the town. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and distant wildflowers. The town below seemed peaceful, almost serene, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the days they had faced. They had survived not only the threat of raiders, but also the struggles within themselves, the fear, doubt, and uncertainty that had once defined their lives. Now they were stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future held. A cowboy turned to the woman, his voice quiet but filled with respect. "We did it," he said. "Not alone, but together. We changed more than the town. We changed ourselves." She smiled, a mix of pride, gratitude, and understanding in her expression. "Yes," she replied. "And we will face whatever comes next the same way. Together." There was a sense of closure in those words, yet also a promise. The journey was not over, but they were prepared for it no matter what challenges lay ahead. As night fell, the town slept peacefully, unaware of the full extent of the danger it had faced, and survived. The cowboy and the Apache woman remained vigilant, but there was a quiet confidence in their watchfulness. They had learned to read the land, the people, and the signs of trouble before it arrived. They had learned to trust one another completely, to act with courage, intelligence, and integrity. And they had learned that the bonds formed through shared struggle could last far longer than any temporary danger. In the weeks and months that followed, the town continued to thrive. The lessons taught by the cowboy and the woman became part of the community's culture. People learned to anticipate challenges, to work together, and to see strength not only in themselves but in one another. The town had survived, yes, but it had also grown stronger, wiser, and more united than it had ever been. And at the heart of this transformation were the two people who had risked everything, faced danger together, and emerged not only victorious, but profoundly changed. Finally, one morning, the cowboy and the Apache woman rode together toward the horizon. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a world full of beauty, danger, and opportunity. They had learned the value of courage, trust, and partnership. They had survived threats and personal struggles alike, and they had helped a town transform into a community of strength and unity. And as they rode side by side, the sun rising behind them, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and forever changed by the journey they had shared. The woman glanced at the cowboy, a soft smile on her face. "We've done more than survive," she said. "We've changed lives. And we've changed ourselves." The cowboy nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. "Yes," he replied. "And that's the greatest victory of all." As they disappeared into the endless plains, their figures silhouetted against the rising sun, the town below remained safe, prepared, and full of life. The lessons of courage, trust, and partnership would endure for generations, carried in stories, memories, and the hearts of those who had witnessed the transformation. And for the cowboy and the Apache woman, the journey continued, not just as wanderers or survivors, but as individuals shaped by challenge, strengthened by trust, and bound together by a shared purpose that would last a lifetime.